I'm not really sure what we're talking about, but I'm sure this
Let's
is the
see.
type of stuff that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I think it's a good start into the conversation. So, welcome everybody to the Biophilia Podcast. We have a guest again here today. Lars and me, we are welcoming and say good morning to David Herrera. Um, yeah, David already started to talk, as you could listen to a little bit, and he was going into his protocols already. So I just started the recording. So
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
all right. Yeah, okay, guys. Let's get into it. We have David here today. We have Lars here today. We have Benny here today, and we're gonna talk about biophilia things. So yeah, I met David actually. He can introduce himself too, but first of all, I met David. I think first time half a year ago, more or less, here in El Salvador, and he's coming here since a couple of years for several times already, and working with people here, but also working on his own health and seeing how it is to live in El Salvador. I don't want to say too much right now. Maybe Lars, you can ask David our favorite first question to get into
Yeah.
Biophilia Podcast.
Yeah, David, welcome also from me. And yeah, our podcast is called the Biophilia Podcast. And biophilia means our innate connection to nature and all living things. What does that mean to you?
Mm, yeah, that's a very, very interesting question. Like, it's hard to really answer that question without becoming philosophical, right? Like, that's just kind of where that question leads you to. But for the most part, in terms of how I view it from like a day-to-day perspective, is that everything is cohesive and communicates together, right? Nothing is really separate, right? The way that I like to frame it is more like your body is a snapshot, a scaled snapshot of what is maybe a planet or a universe, right? It's just different scales, right? And so it's easier for people to think about it this way. Your brain clearly communicates with every tissue in your body somehow, right? Even though it may not directly be touching it, right? And so then you get into things like electromagnetism, the communication through cohesive water networks, all of this stuff that's you can observe it, right? There's science out there proving a lot of these concepts. No, not a lot of people. There are more than just one. It's not just Jack Cruz. There are several people kind of already, like I like to say, opening the cave, right? Like they're shining light on the cave of this science where you can get the picture, right? Like you can shine the light at this part of the cave and see one thing and think, oh, that's interesting, right? Like biophotons that Robert O. Becker, talks about. And then you can find something else that's talking about electromagnetic fields from cell phones raising blood sugar in the brain from somebody else, 10 or 20 years later, right? These are all just kind of bits of the same cave, right? And Jack is kind of the first to kind of start shining the light bigger of like, oh, these are all connected. They're forming a different picture, right? And this picture leads pretty much to answer the question in some way, shape, or form in terms from a biophysics perspective is that everything in your body is light and magnetism connected, right? That's how your body communicates, right? Like if you were to say it in the least complicated language as possible but still get the right point across is, yes, your body has blood and nerves and all of these things, but at the end of the day, the mechanisms that are controlling that uh, are much more subtle and incredibly fast, right? By kind of like, think of it like when you're in a dark room and somebody steps into that room, right? You clearly know somebody is there. Like nobody can really fool you to think that nobody's there, even though you haven't seen them, touch them, or they've said anything. And the reason for that is all of this electromagnetic field stuff. You can sense that type of stuff, pressure gradients, and if you really think about the physics of what went on with that synapses, right? And in order to have that type of communication throughout your body, it has to do with light, it has to do with magnetism, and the medium that everything's communicating in, which is water, right? if you think of that and expand that out to the planet, right? That's exactly what the planet is. It's a living organism, and its medium of exchange is like it is the combination. It's these different gradient layers of air, water, earth, etc. And they are all distributing electromagnetic fields uniquely that lead to variations of life in each one of those domains. Does that make sense? Right? Which in the human body, that's not much different than like organ systems, right? In this organ system, in this part of your body, this type of metabolism exists, right? In this other organism that's doing this other thing, this other type of metabolism exists, right? It's not really that much different, and it's all governed by local magnetic fields through water, light, and magnetism, right? That's literally what's happening at every other ecosystem in the planet, right? So without getting philosophical, that's what I can say with pretty much 100% certainty of that's pretty much it, right? Like if you just took everything else and stripped it down to, a few paragraphs.
Yeah, that's an exciting answer. I wonder then follow-up question would be like, how did we get so disconnected from this innate feeling of being part of nature, like from this connection? So I think for some people it's like, there is this nature, and we are the humans. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah. No,
it's again a very
yeah.
philosophical question. Is it the EMF?
So you're not wrong, right? So you're not wrong, and that I'm trying to like portray this. I kind of want to follow the same template that I just put forth, which is okay. So we have science, right, that's showing that EMFs cause cancer, right? Now, they cause is maybe the wrong word to say, but they contribute to metabolic disruption, which is the main way that you generate the water and the light within the body to communicate, right? So we just established what I think, how the body works. The science is spread out, but it's being put together and has for a long time. This is not new, right? It's been going on since before Roberto Becker, right? So and it's only a continuation of what, I would say even like, have you guys read Schonenberg? He's Austrian.
Oh, yeah.
Schauberger, you mean? Schönberg?
Yeah. One Eye in the Land of the Blind.
No, I didn't read it.
Oh, that's a good book.
I know him,
You should
yeah.
read that. Yeah. Anyway, so you should definitely read him because it goes right into what this is talking about. Like this whole topic that we've just opened up, that book details exactly what they were thinking, right? The people that thought the same way as like living with nature and all of that type of stuff, and how if you live with nature, you actually end up exploiting it in your favor all the time. Like that's kind of how nature is meant to work. Just like if your body doesn't have cancer in it, it's meant to be able to regenerate. It's meant to be able to, you see what I'm saying? Like the only real derailment is essentially a cancer-like state eventually, if it's not cancer before. Like when people would just die of old age, it's eventually, hey, your organs just don't regenerate, right? Your organ now fails, right? So that is think of it like an ecosystem that's exhausted everything that it can possibly exploit, and it finally fails. Now, a cancer, on the other hand, is a cell that it's not cohesive. It's not dead, right? It's not dead. It didn't fail. It's still running, right? It's still spinning. And in fact, it's prioritizing energy production above cohesiveness, right? So if you think of, so there's a lot of environmental ways you get to that endpoint. It's not just EMF, but EMF is a big culprit. It could be excessive blue light. It could be an upside down circadian mechanism of like you work night shift versus a normal shift, right? A lot of things that can kind of influence that outcome. It could even be your epigenetics, right? If your parents just grew up in that type of environment and then both of them, happen to just be the wrong mixture for you, and now you have an epigenetic problem that's light induced, right? There's a lot of ways you arrive at that. Because of all the things that maybe you want to talk about or not, right? Which is EMFs, diets of like the wrong type of food through the season and year round, for decades on end, like, people that only eat carbs, they don't eat any meat, or that they might live in Norway. You see what I'm saying? Like those types of things over the course of decades, right? And then that kind of goes to the question that you asked me. I haven't forgotten about it. Is the reason that happens is because of poor communication, right? So the cancer is poor communication. That's kind of established as far as, like, generally speaking, it's cells that can't talk with the rest of the body. They're doing their own thing and they're accelerating growth and growth and growth and growth. That's pretty reflective of what modern human beings are on the planet, right? Like that's what I'm getting at, right? Why is that? It's the same mechanism. There's poor communication, meaning people have been severed over time, incrementally, more and more away from nature. Pretty much, you've lost communication with nature. That's what I'm saying, right? Like in semi-philosophical terms, right? So probably if you were more open to like some of the science that's really pointing into like quantum physics and stuff like that, you could say directly, right? The moment you start severing communication, you start being disrupted in a way that can be manipulated, right? And that I don't know if you guys want to get down that roadway, because that also dives into this whole thing of going on of like politics and governments and all of this type of stuff all over the world. Like all of that is just the system trying to keep a hold of the reins of being able to steer where everybody goes, right? But the only reason that can happen is because you're disconnected from your local environment, your nature, right? The thing that should be providing your immediate feedback of how you feel, how well you do, emotional state that you're in, the ability to comprehend patterns. You see what I mean? Like if you pull this back, right? If you pull this back, if you're disconnected from the thing that gives you sovereignty, especially over yourself and your thoughts, you are by default offloading that to whatever it is that you're watching or whatever environment you're interacting with, right? So think of it this way, right? I sit outside. Yes, I work on this, but I really don't work on the computer that much, maybe 2 or 3 hours a day, right? And for the most part, the rest of the time I'm reading and consuming material as far as like maybe a podcast or whatever, but that's easy to download. I don't really have a lot of EMF, and you have a lot of time to think, and you have a lot of time to like put patterns together and follow that lifestyle or like ability. Because even people that like take a vacation, for example, they are so ingrained into their environment, they don't really change anything about their day. It's indoors all day long, etc. All of that type of stuff. The more that lifestyle moves forward, the electromagnetic fields are being manipulated in a way that makes your body not be cohesive anymore. So that small disruption now gives anybody that wants to manipulate you leverage, right? That leverage is then exploited by things like telling you things that aren't necessarily true, right? Like that you have to depend on centralized systems to be able to live your day-to-day life, right? That was a foreign thing 100 years ago. Like you told that to any normal person, just the average person that you might run into, hey, we should all like they would literally look at you and they're like, are you stupid? Like they would I have had the privilege to meet people that are like 90 years old, 100 years old, right? And in this area that I live in, and that's all they say. They're like, again, they're old enough that they're like at the end of there isn't anything for them to do, but they're just like, they just can't believe the willingness of just go along with whatever they're telling you, right? That only happens because you can be disconnected and you can't really think well.
Yeah, wow. And I mean, you could go in this conversation for, you could go very deep where that starts, right? Like, is it Adam and Eve putting some cover on their skin or on their genitals, and then it's the first disconnection, kind of like the first clothing, kind of, and then we started from there. Like it's incoherence in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, possibly. I mean,
Yeah.
because especially if you kind of read that book that I'm telling you about, because that book was like written by a family member or some acquaintance after this guy dies. But this guy, they wrote it from his diaries, right, and stuff like that, and his patents, and he was an inventor from like 1905 all the way until he died in like 1960 something or whatever, right? So he lived through both world wars, but his whole premise was exactly this of like, if you just observe nature, right, and you make it your priority to understand fully, even if you don't understand the mechanisms, but you just see, like his whole expertise was how water and magnetism are related and how vortexes are used within water to make ecosystems work, essentially, right? Um, to the point where he was actually had patents with like levitation type devices like discs and stuff like that, right? So and so anyway, a lot of his ideas kind of give you a glimpse of this, of like that was kind of like the place where if that type of thinking, right? I don't know if you're familiar with like it's like some kind of like a artistic movement or something like that where they paint like an ecosystem but with modern amenities like solar panels and wind panels and vegetation growing everywhere and all of that. That's actually kind of like that society that this Schonenberg came from, of like that's kind of what they wanted, right? But they wanted to do it at the cusp, right, which is energy, right? So if you think about it, if you control energy, you can control people if you tell them a lie about how energy is made, essentially, right? If you can get them to believe that, and energy then feeds the infrastructure, right? Electromagnetic fields to the AC power grid instead of the DC power grid. If you bring that back, if you try to like follow it down the line, it's oil, right? Because that is what leads to the ability to make AC electricity, right? Because they didn't have like the hydrogen generation, and like oil is the thing that fuels fires and eventually leads to more and more refinement of metals and all of that. Energy is the thing, right? If you cut out of the oil, then energy is the thing. If you control it, then everything else kind of falls in place as far as like you can cause some chaos here with energy infrastructure or this, and you can manipulate a lot of people because that is centralized, right? The power distribution system of the planet is centralized. Schonenberg brings forth the idea if you just watch nature, nature does not require anything to be centralized. The energy becomes local, from magnetic fields to solar energy, etc. And they're work together, specifically magnetic fields and solar energy, in his view. And I agree with it in terms of how nature works, which is also part of this circadian mechanism, right? When we talk about, educating people with like circadian practices, it's not just go outside, right? It is, you got to get outside, you got to engage correctly and safely with the amount of sunlight that you can handle. And then you have to ensure that your sleeping environment is dark. And when you say dark, I don't mean it metaphorically about light. I mean it completely dark, meaning electromagnetic fields are zero. That no, you know what I'm saying? Like it's not just the things you can see; it's all the things that your cells can sense, right? And it's not even that you want that to go to zero, right? You want it to amplify a magnetic field, right? Which is why there's magnetico sleeping pads and all of that type of stuff. The reason why those exist is because the way that it works, right? Erase kind of like modern living. If you just lived out in the jungle somewhere, the electric field would be high during the day and the magnetic field would be high at night. Your body has figured out ways to exploit both. One is much more ancient than the other. Both were forged when the planet was being scorched at the beginning of dawn, essentially, right? And so you have these capabilities that are very dualistic of being able to flux between essentially two different forms of evolution, right? And again, if you aren't following Jack Kruse, this will be a little bit more complicated, or even people in the science community like biophysics and stuff like that kind of are grasping this concept now of like the oxygenation event literally make that separation, right? There's the time of a lot of radiation very poor oxygen, and just breaking down simple things like carbs. And then much more complex fatty acids, much more oxygen, much more ability to burn those and create a lot of cohesiveness through all of the things that get captured by the mitochondria in terms of electron, all the things it's sensing, right? Because that's essentially what that is. That is a light. Well, I mean, if you really get down to it, there's the proposal of like quantum physics. We can talk about that. It is going to be a quantum physics like star, right? But what that really means is this, right? Stars provide everything for life to exist and matter to exist: planets, comets, humans, etc. Right? The mitochondria is doing that at its scale, right? You're the universe in this case, right? The mitochondria are all the stars in your universe, providing all the matter, all the communication equipment, all the elements for the body to exist, right? When you disconnect those, you have to supply those elements in some way, shape, or form, right? And that leads to disruption with dopamine production or sex hormone production, which then modulates how you think, right? Because those are feedback mechanisms. Now, I know a lot about that in terms of not just like doing natural things, but because of, being competitive in powerlifting and all of that, I know quite a bit, not just, chemically and from, research, but, actual use with other individuals through sports and stuff like that, of what hormones can do for you, right? They don't just build more muscle tissue. They directly influence nervous system. They influence your brain. They give you an edge that is superhuman, for lack of a better way to say it, right? Like, and I don't say that word very lightly. I'm not saying it hyperbole. Your nerves are firing at an exponential rate, depending on some drugs that are anabolic, that are hormones, right? These are hormone type derivatives, which means that your own hormones already influence this, right? They just are influencing it at a natural degree. But if you're being cut off and now you're suboptimal just in that, right? We're just speaking hormones, forget neurotransmitters and all the other stuff, right? Just in that alone, you're going to act completely differently. I can tell you that from experiencing it myself through all of these things and with other individuals, right? Like, there's a reason. That's how I developed certain protocols to make sure that you can do the thing that you want to do, which is, a sports event or whatever it is that you're engaging in, right? And not end up hurting yourself or putting yourself in a bad situation because you don't understand what you're doing with this hormone manipulation. There's always trade-offs, right? But I would say there is a right way and a wrong way to do that, right? And so from that field of experience, I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that if you are somebody who is experiencing hormone problems and the verdict is it's because you don't interact with nature enough in the correct ways, right? We can highlight some of those maybe. Then I can almost reassure you that your willpower is being manipulated in some way, shape, or form, without a doubt. Right? Because if your hormones are subpar, I can tell you if it's testosterone related, whether you're male or female, your willpower is less. Simple as that.
All right. Yeah. Wow. That was a really good introduction into biophilia. I heard you did something with weightlifting in the past, so
Yeah.
I know about that, but our listeners might not know about that. Let's finally start with with your story. What made you do what you're doing right now, David? Like, what is your personal story? What happened in the last couple of years?
So I power lifted. If you're not familiar with that, that's and I still train for that, but I have not competed since 2020, right? So from 2011 to 2020, I competed in powerlifting and in strongman. So in powerlifting, that's squat, bench, and deadlift. That's the three lifts, and you're trying to get as much weight within those three lifts as possible. And I had some world records in the deadlift at around 810 pounds. What is that? 370 kilos, something like that. 375. And then a squat of 740. So that's like 350, something like that. And then 190 bench press, 190 kilo bench press, was my best lifts in 2020. And so those are really good numbers, especially for my weight. Like I was only walking around at 190 pounds, so like 90 kilos.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, somewhere in there. And that was, almost a 10-year journey there, right? Half of it, the first half was natural, the second half was enhanced, because I knew that I was, like, to this day, I'm still like top 10 in that weight class, even after not competing since 2020, all time, right? So like since the history of records that have been kept in that sport. So pretty good numbers. And I still might compete, but I would be competing in a 40 plus age if I competed these days. But that kind of goes right to the question of, like, in 2020 everything was going really good, and I planned on competing for a couple more years, just because why not. But that's also when my business, right, the coaching business. So this whole time I'm coaching other power lifters, 5, 6, 7 people on the side, right? And I have a normal job. I'm working in the oil field doing communication and instrumentation and stuff like that. And in 2020, somewhere in there, right when the COVID stuff's happening, cell phone tower gets built, and I end up quitting my job 2 years later. But a cell phone tower gets built in that time frame right there.
Next to your house.
In 2022, yeah, by my house, yeah. And I mean, like, right next to my house, okay. Right? Like, not on my property, but you walk 10 feet, it's right there. And I didn't really think, like, my wife and I both looked at each other and said that might be a problem, right? But we didn't really understand, like, what would happen or anything like that, right? And so we didn't really think about it much more after that, right? We couldn't protest it. It wasn't on our property, and they, that's just how it was, right? The laws, as far as like what you could do, there isn't anything you can't do. There's some other unique stuff that you can do now, but you're going to need a lot of money and you're going to need a lawyer to do that type of stuff. But, long story short, it wasn't worth doing anything about, mainly because I didn't really know what was going to happen, right? Now, at that same time, I'm not blind to what might happen, right? So I might be speaking, tongue in cheek here, but I had been following Jack Cruz since 2015, right? So I'd already been reading his blogs, but they were already, back then, it was more about blue light and not that much about EMFs, and mainly because I just didn't look, right? Like, because I didn't really know what I was looking at, right? I was just exploiting his information for better recovery protocols for my powerlifting. That's literally how I came across his information for those 5 years. And then the cell phone tower gets built, and then 2 years later, I quit my job and I go full-time coaching because I get more and more clientele. In less than 1 year, so about 8 months after being at my house and not leaving anymore, right? So I wouldn't leave to work anymore. I would just be at my house. I thought I'm like, great, I'll just eat and sleep and train and have a great life, right? I can do it however I want. So basically, I just started living basically kind of the same lifestyle that I live here, right? I'd spend a lot of time outside. I would just kind of hang out outside on my back porch, do my coaching, and then I would train, right? Honestly, not much different than what I do here. But there was the cell phone tower, right? Not 8 months later, I come down with like swollen lymph nodes all over my body, and they call it a flare-up of EBV, right? And so they thought I might have some kind of lymphoma, because that, if you get that type of situation and it's Epstein-Barr, the likelihood of developing a lymphoma or like lymph node type cancer is way higher. So doctors were already, kind of telling me that type of thing. We got to make sure that doesn't happen, and all the stuff, right? So at that point in time, I just stopped doing everything, right? I stopped training. I stopped taking anything that like supplements, etc. All of it. I just stopped doing all of that, and just started trying to make myself feel better, right? Because it was like 2 months of, I wake up, I feel fine, and then around like 1 or 2 p.m., I start feeling tired, and then I have a fever from like 3 p.m. until 6 p.m. So for like that's every day. Like that would happen every day. So for a while, for the first 3 weeks there, I thought I might be dying, right? Like it was pretty scary. Like, don't get me wrong. It was one of those things of like, holy crap, this is going to not work out very well. And so but I got through it right at the end of like 6 or 7 weeks. Um, my body stopped fevering and I started to slowly get better, right? That's when I make consult with Jack Cruz / question and answer session with him. And I mean, without much, and him, right? He's like, that's your cell phone tower. That's what it is, right? And so I'm like, and it only hit me once I actually contacted him, but I just needed somebody else to tell me, right? Like that's probably the reason why I contacted him, because I already knew what he was going to tell me, right? Like, most people kind of operate that way.
Yeah.
And so anyway, yeah. So anyway, so that's what happens. And I tell my wife and she immediately goes, well, how do we find out? Right. Instead of just saying it's not true, she just says, how do we find out? I'm like, well, we just hire somebody to come and monitor your house. And so we did that. And it was like 80,000 microwatts per meter squared everywhere in my house, all the time, 24/7.
You cannot block that, right? When it's so close.
No. I mean, theoretically you can, but, and so, I mean, I looked into this pretty extensively. It was going to cost me around $150,000 to retrofit my house and do it correctly and get it all right. Like, it just was like, I could have done that, right? Like, don't get me wrong. I could have gotten a loan to get something like that done or whatever, but I just didn't feel good about it. Right. Like, I'm like, so now if I go outside, I'm screwed and I have to be inside all the time. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it just didn't make any sense. Right. Like in our situation. So we talked about it, my wife and I, and that was like in November when we got the results of that and all of that. And then we sold our house the following year in April of 23. April of 22 or April of 23. April is somewhere in there. Right. And so sold our house, and then we went to El Salvador for remediation from June until August, right? For the whole family. Because we had, we made pretty good money on the house and stuff like that. And so I just kept it all, saved it all. And we just rented in El Salvador for 3 months. And, it was a pretty passive way to kind of remediate, right? So make sure you remyelinate everybody, make sure that you're, grounding. My kids, it was the first time they spent, months at a beach. So they were in the water all the time. But, it was pretty easy remediation because
did they have any symptoms? And if yes, did they change?
So my wife did. My wife, for sure now we know this, right? At the time we didn't really know. She had for 2 years, right? Coincidentally, maybe a little less than that. She would have like permanent acid reflux. Right. And so she had to take Prilosec all the time, which is an anti-acid medication that you shouldn't take all the time, and sometimes twice a day, which should last 1 24-hour period. So it was getting pretty bad to the point where she thought she might have cancer. Just, she was just saying those types of things. She got a colonoscopy scope. She got a scope from above, and they couldn't find anything other than her esophageal sphincter was not closing all the way. Which makes sense once you learn about how melanin and orifices and how they are more myelinated to preserve a chronic semiconductor state of a closed state, right? Essentially, they're holding a charge on the muscle structure of an orifice to keep it closed. Well, if you're around a lot of electromagnetic fields, that melanin gets bleached essentially and downgraded into adrenaline, noradrenaline, and dopamine, and you essentially degrade that melanin sheet that's embedded into that muscle tissue, and that over time that muscle tissue then loosens its charge, and now it's a permanently open orifice because there's no positive charge on it. Right? That might not be necessarily true as far as positive, but it might not have a pull, but the melanin is missing. The semiconductor that's holding the charge on the muscle tissue is missing over time. That was pretty conclusive. So my wife was taking this medication for forever, basically 2 years at this point. We go to El Salvador, 1 month in El Salvador. She doesn't take the medication anymore. She doesn't get the symptoms anymore. Never has since.
Oh,
awesome. Yeah.
I experienced, quite a bit of symptoms because my tendons and ligaments were very exaggerated, like very, very thick because of these years of powerlifting. And so I experienced a lot of tendon ligament disruption, like feeling like they were on fire, feeling like they were fragile. Like when I would walk or jump, it would feel like they would sting, right? Like it just, it was just weird, right? And those symptoms came after the initial EBV and problem, the lymph nodes and stuff like that. So at the time, right, I'm just not really certain of what's what, right? But and I haven't connected the cell phone tower thing yet, right? But then eventually it hits me. I do the consultation with Jack. I mean, it was short. It was just like, yeah, it's your cell phone tower. You're gonna have to move, right? Like that's basically was his answer, right? Now I didn't necessarily disagree with him, right? Like that was the thing, right? It was just one of those things of like, yeah, you're probably right. How do I prove this, right? I got to figure this out. And so that's what I did. And that's the decision we made. We were lucky enough that the timing was great for everything that we did as far as like when we got out of her house and, being able to go right, because we sold in April. In May, we just kind of stayed close by in an apartment. And then June, we didn't have much to do. And we just got done selling the house that was poisoning us and stuff like that, essentially. Right. And then there's probably some stuff there to have to do with like my second born. Like he developed later, like as he developed a little bit of ADHD, which is now pretty much, I would say 90% resolved. Yeah. Now, for him, we because he's young and in developmental, like the problem arose because that's where he developed, right? The fix wasn't complete in terms of just going to El Salvador. Well, we had to do some like deuterium depleted water therapy for 6-7 months with him post that to kind of get that all to resolve as best as possible to the point where he doesn't need medication or anything like that.
I mean, there's so many topics right now where we can go in. I heard you saying in another podcast. I really want to hear more about that. That you saw yourself like kind of an antenna since your strong ligaments. Is that correct, or how would you phrase that?
Yeah, that's the so yeah. So
yeah, I want to add one more thing because I know right now, like in the last couple of months, 4 months, I know 4 close people in the fitness circle who got seriously ill, and they all work out indoors, and and they are also strong people. So I was thinking like, wow, how could this happen? One was with a more heart, one was like an appendix surgery, one was I think some kind of cancer. I don't know what kind of. Yeah, interesting. And sleep disorder. So I wonder, like,
yeah. So as far as like, there's a whole lot here, and it has to do. It comes back to how your body forms specific structures and makes them cohesive, right? Kind of like what I opened up with, as far as like the magnetic fields of the body and stuff like that. They dictate the very specific type of structure that's going to be formed, not just the size and shape. Like, for example, let's talk about let's kind of like group this all together, kind of your whole question. The reason why I had so when I say I had tendon and ligament problems, basically I was feeling the electromagnetic field is my best guess, to this form of like, it was always interacting, because collagen is a protein, right? It's made of very specific proteins, right? Not just collagen, but tendons, ligaments, fascia, right? All of these, again, they're very, very unique proteins and form very unique matrices. These matrices are kind of like resonance fields, right? Think of it like a satellite dish, right? That's receiving a signal, and then because of its shape and the way that the thing hits it, it amplifies the signal so that then you can decode it. That's essentially what the tensegrity system is, which is not just collagen, but the tendons, the ligaments, the fascia, everything that essentially surrounds the skeleton, right? Because your muscles surround the bones, but the muscles are surrounded by these tendons and ligaments, and they run through meridian lines in the body and stuff like that. There's a reason for that. You are built to receive all of the subtle, natural electromagnetic fields from the Earth's magnetism, the local magnetic field of the water that might be underground, the magnetic field of the resonance of the Schumann resonance in your specific region, right? You are remember, go back to exactly what we started this podcast was, you are an integrated system into a much bigger ecosystem, right? You are designed to sense all of that stuff. And that's what that system is. Now, if you're around non-native electromagnetic fields, you're also going to sense those, right? Now, if you were talking about a cell phone tower and microwave specifically in this case, you're dehydrating those tissues at the same time that they're being hit and collecting all this energy, right? So they're not necessarily being heated up, but they're being disrupted in a way that the mitochondria is producing subpar water in those local tissues, cellular water, right? So these tissues now become much more fragile, much more conductive, right? So they're more electrically conductive because when you dehydrate when the mitochondria produces less water, you dehydrate a tissue. When a dehydrated tissue happens, especially if it has things like copper ions, and because bones and tendons, ligaments, and all of these, they integrate through copper bridges, right? That's what regenerates bone tissue and stuff like that. That's discovered by Robert O. Becker, right? If you think about the substrate that's being dehydrated, it's going to become more electric as it becomes dehydrated. So it's almost like you're shocking yourself more easily, right? Because you're now an antenna in the structure that you've been made to collect any subtle electromagnetic field in your environment. And the tissues that are doing the collecting are being more and more electrically magnified by dehydrating and clumping together, right? Settling together all of these magnetic and conductive atoms, like copper atoms and stuff like that. And so then you have to think of, okay, where else, right? So collagen is not just in your tendons and ligaments. Collagen is also in your skin. Collagen is also in your vascular tissues, right? So anything that is vascular and has skin on it also has collagen. Collagen is being affected, like I just described, in the same way. So things like cardiovascular disease, things like having electrical disruptances in the cardiovascular system or in the system that governs like smooth muscles and stuff like that, like we were talking about sleep apnea and stuff like that. All of that is integrated to collagen failing to do its role as its cohesive system, right? If you thought about this in a different way, it's a hack that's being exploited, in my opinion, by people that know, like governments.
Wow. Yeah, it's interesting. Like, raises for me the question: what is actually fitness? And I see so many, often very fit-looking people. So they have like a six-pack and muscles, but on the same hand, even the most health coaches I know, they have like sleep problems or skin problems, or it's a fascinating thing. Like I was talking to some Salvadoran doctors the other day. They're also Jack Cruz members, and he said he has also like a triangle of health, and it's on the base layer there's light, water, and magnetism, and really exercise is really on the cherry top. It's really it plays a role, but if you don't have the foundation right, it can be even toxic. Would you agree on that?
Yeah, absolutely, right. So that kind of reflects of what I stated earlier. The moment I found out that I was sick, right, like no matter the very first thing was stop doing everything. Right now, most everybody would have because you're feeling like crap. But even after I started feeling normal, I already knew intuitively I should not train. I should not do anything that I've been doing before. I need to figure out why this happened. You see what I mean? Like, I got lucky is what I'm saying, right? Because this could have been much more subtle. It could have been something else, right? Like something else could have happened that still should have alerted me. Like, for example, maybe I tear an Achilles tendon or something like that, right? Like from the stuff that I know now, that would have also been a red flag, right? But I didn't know that then, right? If that would have happened then, I probably would have got surgery on it, and I probably would have kept doing what I was doing for, until I got sick again or something else, or you know what I'm saying? But I got lucky in that it only took one problem to alert me to figure out what the problem was. Now, that does not mean, right, I want to say this very clear, that does not mean, because of what I stated about the collagen system and how that starts to disrupt the whole body and all of that, because it's the antenna that receives the cohesive signaling, it takes about 10 years to fully regenerate the body. What that means is this, like, from what we know, right, all tissues regenerate at their own pace. For example, body water turns over. We know this from deuterium depletion protocols and stuff like that. It takes about 21 days for you to turn over the body water in your body to be at a new deuterium level that's steady state, depending on the new location that you've moved to or the new water that you're drinking, right? That concept holds through for every organ system. Your skin is somewhere around 30 days, etc., right? We all kind of intuitively know this. And so if you think about this, everywhere that collagen needs to be regenerated with new collagen that has not been affected by electromagnetic fields to fully fix that issue. Right? That's what I'm saying. That's my reality, and it's probably the reality of a bunch of other people, is what I'm saying, right? So when I say, and other people are like, oh yeah, if you use light, water, and magnetism, you can heal anything. I fully agree with that. The time horizons are just not being said, right? Number one, there's a lot of unknown because of how time is, right? But there is a concrete of like, oh yeah, if you have been affected in a specific way, like microwaves for one, that would be at the top of the list in terms of like tendon, ligaments, and all collagen systems and all of that, which is sadly the majority is, because you have things like this, right, in everybody's pocket. Then you realize that depending on the level of damage, you could be talking about full cardiovascular remodeling, right? Because you will get a new cardiovascular system at the rate of that organ system's turnover speed. That could be, I think it's somewhere around 1 to 2 years for the cardiovascular system, right? The longest system is bone, and the system right before that is collagen, tendons, and ligaments, right? And all the fascia that's in them. That takes around 4 to 6 years, right? So that's kind of where I'm at in that time frame, right? That's why I also haven't started competing and all that. I'm just kind of testing things out, right? As far as like, how far along am I, right? So I'm not blind to like, I fixed a lot. Like, so let's talk about other symptoms, right? Because this is very important. Like other symptoms that I had, anxiety for no reason, like just waking up anxious, right? Like just literally I would wake up and I would just be like, oh, I don't know what's going on, but something's wrong, right? And I would almost start sweating, like as I'm like giving myself my first drink of the day. That was weird, right? I didn't really realize what was going on, but that's a clear nervous system input that your nervous system isn't able to shut down. You see what I'm saying? So there's a lot of that type of stuff. That's all gone away, that sort of thing, right? So really the only thing that I notice is I still cannot operate. I can functionally make myself lift really heavy weights. My body doesn't survive it. My tendons, ligaments, my fascia, I would say it's probably more like my fascia and like the collagen and strips between muscle tissues. It's too stiff on me, right? And the reason, and so when I go right now, right. So like I can operate, like I can consistently hit like 50% of what I would be able to do and not really hurt my body. And I like, and I like movement and all of that. So I do that, right? So my workouts don't look like super crazy abnormal, like moving some sled, moving, subpar weights for me, and a lot of body weight, a lot of outside stuff, just to kind of keep movement going and keep my body, feeling good. The moment I increase my loading after a period of 2 to 3 or 4 weeks, somewhere in there, it never goes longer than 4 or 5 weeks, I start to get little micro tears in between muscles and stuff like that. And it's not the muscles, right? Because they don't bleed, right? The muscles are not tearing, right? There's no bruise, there's no nothing. It's just the fascia and the tendons in between all of them that's stiff, and it's being ripped because I'm moving it through lots of forces that they're too stiff by. There's a reason for that, right? I remember the dehydration effect that I mentioned at the mitochondria, at the collagen level inside of those tissues. that means that it's being loaded with deuterium, right? Because it's being dehydrated, and so deuterium is going to make stiffer membranes. That's what made my collagen stiffer. So now my collagen is strong. Because it's not a nervous system problem. I can load up almost 70 to 80% of what I've been able to do in the past, and I can move it. My body just doesn't, the tendons and ligaments don't survive it, right? Because they've been stiffened to a degree before, right? Because remember, I went into my powerlifting career for 10 years and I got deuterated in the last 4 years, essentially, right? Now, some of that I already knew I was doing, right? Some of the protocols that I would induce, like PEDs, like I'm not saying all of this is the cell phone tower. I'm saying all of it combined is the result of what I deal with now, right?
Yeah, very interesting.
Right, because think about it, what I did. I increased metabolism through PED use, right? I increased cell turnover. I increased anabolism. I built a lot of buildings, really big, really strong buildings. I built them with very stiff collagen structures because they were deuterated. Those manifest now, right? Because this whole time I'm building them, right? They're not accumulating at any significant degree as I'm competing until the tail end. And then I get really deuterated because now I'm spending 24/7 at the cell phone tower. So, and I'm still taking PEDs. So for that 1 year that I was next to the cell phone tower when I quit my job, that was the major, that's what, Jack Cruz calls an asymmetric lever, right? Which is what light is. Light is an asymmetric lever because of all the things it moves. Well, that also means that it works in reverse in physics, right? This aberrant light, the microwave light, was an asymmetric lever, especially in the environment that I introduced it to, right? High anabolic environment, lots of training, lots of food. I probably gained like 40 pounds of muscle tissue in that 1 year.
Real quick, can you explain the listeners what deuterated is?
Yeah. So whenever the mitochondria needs oxygen to come in to the inner mitochondrial membrane to accept the electrons from food, right? That oxygen then interacts in a chemical reaction with oxygen and hydrogen, and that makes water and CO2. Part of that same byproduct system makes ATP. Most people kind of know the ATP part, that your mitochondria make ATP and they power your cells. Most people kind of understand that part in terms of they've heard that sentence, but they kind of never get told and never really realize that before the ATP, there's this CO2 and water part that gets released. The water stays in the mitochondrial matrix and in the cell and forms the cellular water, which is what turns into cohesive water or easy zone water that now is more like a battery and has an exclusion zone and makes its own magnetic field, aka the water provides lots of different benefits for the cell to keep a semiconductor sanitary environment, right? So what I mean by that, let's say it in a different way. It allows your cell to stay as a microchip, right? Microchips work and they do all these fancy calculations on all this stuff. If you get them wet, they don't work, right? The magnetism and the photo sensing that the cell is doing, right? So the communication that a chip does through electrical circuitry, the cell is doing it through magnetic fields and light and water. That mitochondrial process of making this water directly contributes to the water and controls the type of light that can flow through that water because it changes the density of the water. The density of the water, and the reason why the density changes is this deuteration process, right? So that means that hydrogen has two flavors. One is protium, one is deuterium. The protium is just a neutron and an electron, and the deuterium is a neutron, an electron, and a proton in the middle. So it's a neutron and a proton in the middle, two atoms in the middle. Makes it twice as heavy. That means that all the water, if the water becomes deuterated, it's twice as thick, right? So that's going to change how light travels through it, and it's going to change how magnetic fields react around it, which are the things that your body's using to make processes happen. So it starts to disrupt communication, right? And as the cell becomes more and more dehydrated, less and less water is made, and more of that water is filled with deuterium, right? If you want to get down to like kind of where the deuterium is coming from, it's coming from your environment, it's coming from your food, it's coming from the supplements you're taking. You see what I mean? Like this is not something of like, oh, the EMF is depositing deuterium. No, the EMF is messing with metabolism and communication so that your cell makes less water. And because it's making less water, you immediately start to disrupt processes like dopamine production, right? Because you start to become less hydrated, you're more hypoxic, etc. And that leads to melanin degradation, and it leads to dopamine disruption. And when you start to disrupt dopamine, now you become addicted to scrolling on your phone and ordering food off of DoorDash and spending all your time on Netflix and ordering Amazon. You see what I mean? Like that cascade starts because of this whole disruption with metabolism, which then makes you consume more and more deuterated foods, right? Basically foods that are engineered, right? Candy, cake. You see what I'm saying? Like, and those are all heavily deuterated. Then you get ill, or then you get some kind of diabetic thing. Then you start taking a medication that's also deuterated. When I say deuterated, anything that's synthetic is deuterated, even if it's bioidentical, right? The reason for that is because they are not controlling for the hydrogen atoms within the substrates, right? So think of it this way. They make a bar, right? A protein bar, right? The water that goes into that protein bar is just normal water, which, I mean, it's not bad for you. It doesn't have bacteria. It's sanitized, etc. Right? I'm not saying they're doing it willingly and harmfully. I'm saying they're not taking into account how the body keeps a clean room within your body, right? Because remember what I said before this. All of the mitochondria's job is not just to produce ATP and energy. It's also to produce the medium that you're going to communicate through, and that medium influences the magnetic fields and the light fields the body's going to produce. It influences that. That medium is made from special hydrogen. That hydrogen is coming from your food, and it's being selected by specifically to have less deuterium in it, so you can make this special medium so that your universe has the right medium to communicate through, right? And
But
people that makes go ahead.
Could you make a protein bar with low deuterium water, or could it be possible to make something like that? I know people don't control.
Yeah,
for that,
no, I think it is possible. Now, does that make it like? Do I think that there is more to that than deuterium? Yes. But if you're going to say that you're going to live, because that's the problem, right? I'm not necessarily even saying that having a protein bar is bad. I'm just saying when you are deuterated, you have a blunted neurological dopamine, adrenaline, and noradrenaline. Your reward system is messed up, is what I'm saying, right? So what that means is, for lack of a better way to say it, and I'm not trying to be insulting, you become lazier, you become more just kind of go with the flow of whatever is next. You become more lackadaisical. So it's very easy to just be like, oh, I'm just going to get this food and that. You stop thinking too hard, is what I'm saying. You stop exerting yourself into the universe, and you just kind of get swept away with it, right? For lack of a better way to say it. I know that sounds a little philosophical, but it is pretty true. Right? Exactly. You're not making your own. You're dependent on something else giving it to you. Now you seek out food, electronics, gambling, porn, whatever, right? Like all the things that lead down to dismay and waste, essentially, right? And I'm not saying I'm not affected. I'm saying that this is a clear pattern that I understand at this point, that I've even fallen into at different points in time in my life, right? In terms of that's pretty much the pattern. Now, at first, it sounds like, oh, you're losing your willpower, until you understand these biophysics that we're talking about that start with your environment, right? And then So let's keep going with the deuterium level, right? So you start to become more dehydrated by electromagnetic fields or, excessive blue light use, etc. That leads then to collagen system failing. That means that even when you do step into nature, it's harder for you to get the right cohesiveness back because your system is already semi-compromised, right? You got to spend extended time there. And if you are eating synthetic foods, more to your point, right? To my knowledge, there isn't any synthetic foods at this current time that does not take into account the deuterium level of the proteins in it. Right. So that means when your body breaks them down into amino acids, the hydrogen systems in them get donated to your tissues. They could be more deuterated. More deuterated means that the systems are going to be more brittle over time, right? They're not going to hold up as in terms of how the body is meant to last, right? So then it starts to look like you fall apart pretty easy, right? Now, I don't know about you. I've had the pleasure of working with some very old people that are incredibly strong, right? Like we call them farmer strong around here, but they're in their 80s and they still get up and go and feed cows and whatever, and they're pitching hay every single day. And you shake one of their hands or you ask them to do, and I mean, they'll get up and pick 100-pound barrel off the ground and put it in their truck, and they're 85 years old. Do they struggle with it? Yeah, a little bit, but they've been doing it their whole life, so it's not really a big deal for them. And then you start to realize, hey, do you have any backgrounds? A little bit, here and there, but they're just more resilient because they're not living a deuterated lifestyle even into their old age. And even at old age, you're not regenerating, right? So that's the thing, right? Like my theory is once you kind of make it to a certain point in life, let's just call it 60 or 70, your anabolism is done. Right? You're not going to be regenerating tissues very fast anyway. So if you made it to there without being deuterated and you don't live a deuterated life, you're probably going to live pretty long time. And that's what I've noticed with all the people that I'm around that live that lifestyle of, they live out in the farm and pitching hay. Hey, by the time they're 60 or 70 years old, which is, 15 years ago for some of these people now, they weren't never deuterated. They didn't live that lifestyle, and their body is just kind of hanging on to the tissues they accumulated in that last decade from 50 to 60, right? So when you start looking at it like that, you can really start what I call periodizing your life in terms of athletic endeavors, health endeavors, longevity. And you see what I mean? Like different stages, if you start to understand how the body kind of works. And again, it's not like this decade makes a body for the next decade. It kind of works out like that. There are certain things within that decade of life that matter more. Like I just pointed out. Yes, I powerlifted for a decade, but I really didn't start accumulating a lot of risk in terms of my habits hurting me until that very tail end of like 3 to 5 years because of the specific things that I didn't understand at the time. Would I have done something about it? Probably, right? But I didn't know it, right? As far as like how it all looped together. Now I do. So now I understand that, if I start training hard and doing any of the stuff that I'm doing too early, I'm actually going to end up hurting myself more. And that came, and so I tested that theory. I started training over a year ago now, ever since I got done building my house, just slowly, but feeling it out. And essentially I did that kind of like cycle of like 2 or 3 months of starting to train, taking some time off, 2 or 3 months of starting to train. And every time I got into the range of, hey, these weights are now pretty heavy now, they're pretty respectable, they're feeling great. After 2 or 3 weeks of that zone of training for me, I would start to get little micro tears. Nothing that would like, not a permanent, like, I hurt, I tore a muscle or whatever, but just, that kind of tweaked that. There's a little bit of something going on there. You can clearly feel a little bit of deformation. After a few days, it doesn't feel like anything. That would happen pretty regularly in those 3 increments. So then that's when I started to loop this together of like, that's exactly what happened before. And I am seeing the result that should be expected because I haven't lived a low deuterium lifestyle long enough to regenerate those tissues that I compromised in this other period of life.
So you think in maybe 3-4 years you might be train even in another way again, like before?
Yeah, I probably will. Well, that's the hope, right? Like that's the design, right? That's the test, and essentially my theory of like, because that's the thing is like, I keep making progress in other areas. Now, this is kind of the last area to kind of make enough progress to, compete again if I wanted to.
Yeah.
And, I do enjoy training, right? Like, it's not like it's enjoyable to have a goal, especially in a competition, especially when you're at the level that I would compete at, right? Like it's a pretty high level, right? So that would be, and it's not like I'm super old. I'm barely going to be 40 this year, right? So it's one of those things where technically I have another decade of competing and training if I wanted to, if my body was in the right time, right? But that's what I'm saying. Like periodization, I already know, hey, this period of time is going to be a little bit of muddy, and I don't actually know when it's going to end, but I do know the things that I need to do to get it to keep moving in the right direction, right? So over a period of time, maybe this time next year, I start testing it again. How far do I get before I start to experience that again? Does it go, do I get to like working weights and it's like, oh, nothing's happening? Right? Then it's like, okay, well, then I've solidified that. Now, are there things that I'm doing to make sure that my collagen system is being regenerated in the correct way? And that's, where we get into, how I help people now is all the knowledge of like that, of like getting the right timing for solar exposure, even in the winter, if you live in the right place that you can do that, getting enough cold exposure so that you can make internal biophotons correctly. If needed, bringing in things like deuterium depleted water and things of that nature. Magnetic fields, like influencing passive vagal nerve stimulation in and around the neck and that sort of stuff. So this is a copper necklace with like magnets in it and stuff like that, right? So anything and everything, right? So let's talk about that, right? Like how does the system get rid of deuterium? Through sweating, through urination, through defecation, and through the skin, right?
Yeah. And lower deuterium environment, right? Lower
and a low, so that's the accumulation side. And so the accumulation side is, low EMFs, plenty of sunlight, and no, as low a deuterium depleted water as you can afford, essentially, right? If you wanted to accelerate this. Now, I'm lucky enough that now, for a year now, at this house, I have a well. I have my own personal well, and it's at around 132 parts per million. So it's not, deuterium depleted high quality, but it is better than most at 132 parts per million. And so I drink that regularly now, and I feel like that's helped for a while. But this next step, right, is a full deuterium depletion protocol of you're only going to drink deuterium depleted water for 3 or 4 months and that sort of stuff. And at the same time, there might be some other things that I employ there, like an anabolism phase in that environment, right? So think of it this way. If you think of what I'm talking about, the bad environment with anabolism accelerated the deuteration process. A good environment that you ensure, that you rectify, that you double check, meaning you take a saliva deuterium depletion test, you actually, oh yeah, I am clearly running at 110 parts per million or 100 parts per million, and you maintain that level for 3 or 4 months, and you induce anabolism in that time frame. If the things that you're using, any atomic mass that you're adding to the body, so I'm not talking about taking a bunch of supplements, right? Or necessarily PEDs, unless you can guarantee that those PEDs would be things like testosterone, things that accelerate anabolism. Yeah. Right. The accrual of tissue, right? Whether it's tendons, ligaments, all of those. Now, again, do not do what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if you initiated something like that and you had control of the deuterium level of the things you're putting into the anabolic phases of the body, you then accelerate the accrual of those tissues to be deuterium depleted. Does that make sense? You're attacking the same system that got attacked with a different vector, right? Instead of having lots of deuterium, you're attacking it in the same way with a low deuterium input.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right? You are already talking about your copper necklace, and I'm seeing now Dr. Jack Cruz talks about chewing mastic gum and copper necklaces. That's a kind of new things. And how would
they're passive, and so
like
basically
I was wondering, like, because what I see people use these things, but they eat a very high deuterium diet still, for example. Or like, what is really, how important is that? And I also never heard a person saying like, I can really feel this necklace. What is your experience with it?
So here's a couple things, right? So let's talk specifically about the necklace first, and then we'll talk about like the mastic, like kind of what it's influencing, right? So the necklace is making a magnetic field at each one of these little connections from a small magnet. Well, I'll just take it off so it's easier to understand. Right? So the magnetic field goes like this, right? If I'm holding the necklace like that, the magnetic field goes along in a cylinder like this, right? And so when you wrap it around the neck, think of that same cylinder going around the neck like this, right? So these magnetic fields are going like this. They're arranging in a north-south direction, which then what goes through the neck? Your blood, and so your two carotid arteries and your two vagus nerves, right? Those are going to be loaded with, the blood is going to be loaded with deuterium. So it's highly paramagnetic, right? So it's going to be, you're going to influence blood flow and the depletion process at the cardiovascular level by inducing a better flow. Now, this has to do with magnetism and vortex. That's where this Schoenberg guy his book is a very good read. I highly recommend it. It's not super technical in terms of the science of this, but he leads you down the same path through very poetic, very eloquently written stuff. But the point being is that magnetic field is influencing the blood, so it can deuterium deplete correctly, and it's influencing the water networks of the vagus nerve to deuterium deplete correctly. Let's talk about how that is. So the mastic gum, right? Chewing, right? You're using these muscles right up here, right? If you chew and you get up, like these muscles start to hurt and these muscles start to hurt. All of these muscles here interconnect through fascia and tendons and ligaments with the vagus nerve that's running through these parts of the brain, body as well. And there's even vagal nerve stimulators that you can clip on the ear or inside the ear canal that also trigger the nerve that's connected to the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve goes and innervates the brain, obviously, and then comes through here and innervates through the sinuses and through, right behind the face here, and then comes down to the heart and then goes down to the gut. It is like an underground river, right? So, there's rivers underground. That means that there's water literally flowing underground and moving things along, even though you can't see them from the surface. Think of the same thing as the vagus nerve. Not only is it electric, right? It is powered by cerebral spinal fluid, right? The spinal fluid, right? Everybody knows they have cerebral spinal fluid in your spine and in your brain. Well, that's part of your nervous system, and it goes into nerves as well, right? You're not like a capsule, right? There isn't compartments that are keeping things away from other things, right? You're just kind of all together, right? But magnetic fields and different gradients keep them in their own section. So think of nerves more like water networks, essentially. They are specifically deuterium depleted, and the vagus nerve is responsible for innervating the major cascade of depleting deuterium from the brain through the vortex that happens here in front of the face, and then down into the cardiovascular system, because the deuterium is supposed to stay in the blood and not everywhere else. So it can drop off excess deuterium at the cardiovascular system because it innervates to the heart directly there. And then if there's too much deuterium in the blood, it can dump that back into the vagus nerve, which then continues down into the gut, where you're going to defecate it through urination, defecation, and all of that. And then there's the deuterium level that's being moved at the surface level, right? So your skin is sweating some of that out, etc. It also sweats, right? So you basically have two different ways, one internal that's taking everything and funneling it down and eventually out, and one that's basically sweating everything out. And all of those are there.
What about saliva and spitting? When I chew mastic gum, it's like very, I have the feeling I swallow a lot or I spit a lot. Is that?
Yeah, totally. So the exact way that there's probably multiple ways that the mastic gum is helping. The main one is the actual mastication and action that's stimulating the vagus nerve in all those muscles, right? You're working them out, and that nerve is moving and it's pumping, and you're causing chaos, which causes a better fractionation process, right? A better way to distill out protium from deuterium. That's essentially what the physical mechanism of masticating is doing. And then there's the saliva manufacturing. And then you have to understand that the nerves that go to all of your teeth are also integrated into the system, right? So does that mean that the saliva glands are now collecting deuterium and you're swallowing it and you're going to defecate it out in some way, shape, or form, whether it's through urine or through other metabolic processes? Probably, right? But then you have to think about, that's going into the stomach, which is high acid, right? So that's going to be a lot of proton flow. So maybe it's contributing to the acidic profile of your stomach. There's a mechanism there, is what I'm saying, where either deuterium is being recycled for another system, or it's being excreted to be in its final destination, which is outside your body, right? Those are the two ways. And basically every process in the body, be it through nerve or blood vessels, is there to keep things in the right place, right? And that is where making sure that, so your saliva level, right, is probably going to be reflective slightly higher than your tissue level, right? So that's why I don't really worry about like saliva levels being super, super, super low. Somewhere around 120 to 110 is probably perfect, because you're probably slightly lower than that in other tissues like your brain and your cerebral spinal fluid. And that is really kind of where you want most of the regeneration to be happening, is in that range. I venture to also say, just from my experience with other clients, when you are, because the dielectric, right, the conductivity of water changes when the deuterium changes, right? So when you are more deuterium depleted, most of my clients that adhere to very strict deuterium depletion protocol, they can actually fly. They fly a lot, which is the reason why they're doing it and all of that type of stuff. And their blood work, especially when you're looking at things like sex hormones, vitamin D production, everything that depends on the hydrolase enzymes, which are going to be reflective of the body water of the body, it all seems to kind of keep working if they keep a very low deuterium level working, because you're not being affected by electromagnetic fields nearly as much, because the dielectric constant of lower deuterium level is less electrically conductive. You're kind of, for lack of a better way to say it, not letting the tissues dehydrate because the water is less reactive to the magnetic fields.
Yeah, fascinating. Lars, go on. Like, I'm asking all the questions. Do you have some? I have so many questions left, but
Yeah, there are many
Okay.
things.
Yeah, maybe we can go through a few real quick before it gets too long.
And in this whole picture, what do you think? What's your perspective? How important is grounding?
It's very important in terms of so let's talk about, if you don't ground, are you going to get the same benefit in terms of light production? Or maybe, I would say maybe the only time that you can get away with not being grounded, that I would say it's kind of here or there, it would be in water, right? Like if you're in a pool, right, it should be grounded. But like, say you have a kiddie pool, right? You got a makeshift cold plunge or something like that, and it's not grounded. I would say that's probably like the least harmful of the I'm not grounded that people might do regularly, right? Now, being indoors and not grounded, that's a different thing, right? Because that might actually be what you want to do if you're in a high electric field environment. You don't want to be the conductor, right? You want to be insulated, right? So I would want you not grounded, and maybe with some actual shielded clothing on, right? Something like that. Now, when you're trying to get the benefits of being outside, I think that grounding is very important, right? Grounding when being outside is going to essentially make it so that you make less free radicals, less reactive oxygen species with whatever it is that you're doing, right? Whether that's just sunlight hitting your skin, or whether you're actually exercising outside, you're going to make less reactive oxygen species, and you're going to make more cellular water if you're grounded while you do it. So in terms of if you're in a remediation process, like kind of like why I am, I try to be grounded all the time, right, as much as possible. I have a cement patio that's grounded, so I, mainly hang out barefoot on here. I have a lot of grass. I have a pond that's got grounding rods in it and stuff like that. I try to be grounded all the time because of what I'm attempting to do for my body, right? Being grounded ensures that the body water that I'm making is as depleted as my body can make it from my environment. I'm maximizing that. So if you think about it like that, the less grounded you are, the more, the less grounded you are, the less water you're going to make. More of that water will be more of the oxygen that would have been used for that water will be turned into reactive oxygen species. Does that make sense?
Yeah. In terms of training, how bad is it to not be grounded? Like if you train, maybe you can also talk a bit about the comparison from training inside in a gym and training outside, and especially the difference of being grounded and not grounded while training.
So this is different risk factors for different people, right? Kind of, and the reason is because of the conversation that we had before of like this time accumulation of the tissues and stuff like that. So it's really an N equals one, and I would say the following: there is, in my opinion, probably ways that you could train inside that would be totally fine. Do normal people have access to that? Not unless they know a lot about how to ground an environment correctly. And so basically what I'm saying is, if you're going to train ungrounded, if it's for the performance, aka you're on a field at the competition or you're at a competition, totally do what you need to do. I don't think that that's going to necessarily be a long-term hiccup. If where you train consistently, where you practice, is very heavily electrified, right? Let's talk a normal gym, LED lighting, Wi-Fi everywhere. Yeah, I don't care about grounding in that environment. In fact, I'd rather you not be grounded, and I'd rather you wear some shielded. I would rather you try to mitigate the risk, a really high DHA diet, possibly some deuterium depleted water. And if I was dealing with an athlete, right? Like, and the reason why I'm saying this is because I have experience with this scenario of like, hey, I'm not going to get this person, right, to not go where they're being irradiated because they're getting paid to go there, right? and they're getting paid to train in there, right? And so it's one of these things where you attack it from a different perspective, and it seems to work pretty well, right? If you keep some deuterium depleted water in the system, you keep your deuterium level lower, you keep your DHA high, you wear some it can be athletic clothing, but just made out of special material. And then when you're not there, you compensate by doing some grounding and even if you're not actually training, right? Now, I always encourage people to involve some kind of hybrid, maybe your GPP work or your conditioning work or whatever, anything extra that you can do as far as training or that do like rehab work, stretching, mobilizing, etc. Do it outside, do it grounded, and then you mitigate that particular thing, right? Like, so I think that for keeping the body healthy in terms of tissue health, grounding is very important. Yes. So important that you should offset any time that you spend ungrounded working out those tissues with at least equal time doing the opposite. Mm. And I don't think that's far to, again, most athletes don't really have that far, that's not that big of a pushback, right? It's much more for the regular person that's been brainwashed into thinking that exercise is going to make them healthy. Right? Most of the people that I get from that camp, I don't actually have them train. I don't have them go to the gym. I have them go for a walk every morning. That's mandatory for 45 minutes every single day with as little clothing as possible, right? So usually that looks like, hey, the workout clothing that you would have worn to the gym, just put it on, and I want you to go for a walk, no matter the temperature, for 45 minutes every morning, right? You just doing that one thing, right? They're not allowed to take their phone with them. It's better if they take somebody else with them. But at the very least, do that. And if it happens to be a season where there is like birds and stuff, watch for birds, listen for birds, be engaged, right? Like, that's all I want you to do for 45 minutes every single morning. And that gets them in shape. It takes time, right? It's not like in 1 month they look completely different. But the thing is, it's a self-reinforcing pattern, right? Because they're feeling good, they're getting outside, they're moving, they're seeing something new every single day, et cetera, et cetera. 8 months later, they've lost 50 or 60 pounds. They haven't done much of anything. It wasn't that even, that hard, other than changing their dopamine levels, changing the way that they're little things that make up the whole, right? And then only then, if they're like, hey, you know what? I kind of wish I had, bigger biceps or bigger arms or more defined or whatever, right? Then at that point in time, we start introducing, some simple training that takes dumbbells and your body weight that can be done at the same time that you were doing your walk. So you start doing less of the walking and more of this other training, and you do it in your backyard or your porch or whatever. And next thing you know, their muscles start to change. And for the most part, that's, what they wanted to begin with, right? They wanted to have a fully capable body that looked good, right? It does not require a gym. Now, there's winter and there's things that people won't do. You see what I'm saying? Like, that is where you start incorporating all this other stuff of like, okay, well, how do we skin this cat? How do we mitigate the risk, right? And for the apex of that category is people that get paid to go train in a gym, which are professional athletes, semi-professional athletes, people that are trying to become professional athletes, those types. Which I have some of those, and that's that's one of the things that we have to deal with. That's one of the main things that we have to kind of like mitigate and be have a watchful eye on and have some kind of a protocol in place, pre-injury, pre-problem, Now, normal people, you usually just kind of show them exactly what I just told you. And, it takes maybe a year, maybe a little less or a little more, depending on their exact situation. And then they realize, oh, yeah. And then there is, right? Don't get me wrong. There is the occasional, it's like, hey, you're not going to be able to fix this because your problem is literally the military base that's sitting right next to your house. Or you see what I mean? Like those do exist, and I do run into those. For the most part, those people that now contact, the people in that category that contact me, they usually have enough money and they're usually open-minded and they're usually young, right? They're usually in their late 20s and stuff like that. And they're just having problem after problem that really shouldn't be happening. And, it's not hard to, kind of like what happened to me. Hey, go get this, contact this person, have somebody come in out, monitor your place. And, that's happened several times where I've just had them, hey, just go and have somebody monitor this, pay them $400 or whatever they're charging you to come and monitor your apartment. Then when they tell you what's going on, get the report and send it to me and we can discuss what needs to happen, right? And 9 times out of 10, I already know what they're going to find, but it's not about me telling them what to do, right? It's about me giving them the right tools to make the right decision for themselves, right? And once they do that, it's almost always like, oh, well, I'm just leasing this and I'm just going to break this lease and go, somewhere else. And then at that point, that's where, knowing more actually helps, right? At that point, that's what I'm saying. Most people that are young kind of understand some of this stuff intuitively, right? Because they already know that their body's not working correctly and it should be working correctly, right? They just don't understand, they go to a doctor and the doctor doesn't know what to do, right? And so it's like, okay, well, now when you tell them that it's their environment, they're like, okay, well, can you prove it? And I'm like, well, yeah, you can. We can prove that there's something in your environment that you're probably unaware of. And, mold and EMFs kind of go hand in hand. So which one do you want to believe? Right. Because that's how the way I treat it, right? Like when you start understanding about EMFs and kind of how they influence biology and microbiomes, you understand why people get gut problems around EMFs, and you start understanding why people get skin problems around EMFs, and you start understanding, oh, that's affecting bacteria and stuff like that. So even if they don't believe anything about EMF, sometimes the EMF conversation doesn't even come up. I just tell them, oh, you know what? You're getting this thing and you got this problem. Why don't you just test for mold? And then they test for mold, and next thing you know, they're like, holy crap, my whole place is full of mold. I'm like, just move then. And they're like, yeah, let's move. Right. Yeah, we got to move. Right. And so they move. And most of the things get fixed. Right. There's been more than, I would say 3 or 4 times where that exact scenario has happened, where I knew that the easiest way to just get them to move, because that was the solution, is, hey, you have mold. And the reason you have mold is electric fields. I don't have to tell you that, but I know that that's what's happening. And, just have it tested for mold. And next thing you know, they're like, oh, yeah, there's a lot of mold around here. And then, that's causing this and this and this. And some of their symptoms are immediately related to the mold, and other symptoms are immediately related to the electromagnetic field, and they move and they start feeling better, and everything kind of returns to normal. But there are other people where there isn't any mold, but they're clearly being affected at the gut level because their microbiome is the thing that's being reacted at the bacterial level by that. And the way I get them to work around that is I send them on vacation to somewhere that I know is going to be good for them. Right. I'm like, I send them, I get on Airbnb and look at up places and get my maps out and look at cell phone towers and all of that. And I pick out an Airbnb and I tell them, hey, just go here for a week and tell me how you feel. Right. Take a vacation. And, they half the time they're already planning on vacations or something like that in that month. And I just tell them to do that. And then they go there and they're like, holy crap, I could eat whatever I wanted and my gut didn't feel all messed up and all of this. I'm like, yeah, well, sometimes that happens. I'm like, and that's when you start to put all these pieces of electromagnetic fields and the microbiome and how the whole planet links together through a magnetic, electric, biophotonic pathway that continually links back from small to big and big to small.
Oh, yeah, we made the circle to the first question.
We did.
but I don't want to finish completely yet. Actually, I could go forever because I don't know how to do it, but maybe we can do it rapid fire. I'm not sure if we can really do it, but I
Okay,
have
well,
some.
I'll try.
um, so yeah, I know someone with tinnitus, and how would you say, like, or maybe just briefly, why what do you think is the main cause, and what would you do? What would you advise somebody who has tinnitus?
So I can't really tell you the main. So I can tell you the main cause, but it's not going to help anybody. The main
Yeah,
cause is you're losing melanin in the cochlea, right?
yeah.
So that's pretty simple. That's what's happening, right?
Mm.
What to do about it depends on how it's happening, right? And
Yeah.
unfortunately, I can't tell you that, but this is where I would start. Any kind type of electromagnetic field that's affecting your head is something that you need to get rid of. If you don't have a meter, this is a futile thing, right? You'll get rid of most things like iPods, headphones, cell phone not next to your head. You can do the obvious things, but without a meter, you're really not going to be able to know with certainty that you've gotten rid of all of that. And the next thing you need to do is you need to ramp up cold exposure to this area so that you can cause more and more biophoton action to remyelinate the cochlea. You're going to want a high DHA food to make sure that more of the tissues that are receiving that cold exposure are able to control the magnetic field better. So you're going to want to have a magnetic fat in that area, which is DHA. Um, and I would probably even go to the extent that this might help a little bit with that for locally deuterium depleted the local muscular tissue around here. They can help with not reaccumulate. Basically, it'll help with the formation of melanin, right? The sooner you get rid of deuterium in those tissues, which is why you're going to want a lot of sun and a lot of cold in that area. And again, if this is job related, right, like you work at a place where you have constant electromagnetic fields, then you're looking into shielding at least around the neck. And then like I would go as far as like maybe you wear earmuffs that are electrically shielded, right? I don't know, right? Like there's a lot of possibilities. But the main thing is melanin creation should be priority, and electric fields in and around the head should be priority in terms of defense. That's probably the best I can do without
I love it.
more.
That's actually a compliment I want to give you. And like, if you always like, if you meet David or if you book a consult, we come to that later with David. He always gives like whatever problem you have, and this was not even very specific, but you always gives kind of specific answers. I really appreciate that. Last, I go for one more, okay?
Yeah,
Okay.
go on, go on.
You told a person we both know, David, to do like a certain ice bath protocol, where it's like 6 minutes here in the tropics, and then totally dry afterwards, and then another 6 minutes, and then this whole scenario 3 times. Why is that? Like, why this ice bath scenario?
So the timing matters less, like 6 minutes versus and 3 times. Like that doesn't matter too much. The point is what you're trying to do is you're cooling. So going back to electrics, magnetics, and all of that, cold raises magnetic fields, right? You know this at the very maximum level with superconductive magnets, right? The colder you get the magnet, the stronger the magnetic field. The magnetic field in the body dictates proper manufacturing of the water in the body. It also brings and makes the whole biophotonic and magnetic field structures in the body tighter together, so it makes it faster communication. You're enhancing the thing, right? So if we wanted to get into the details, we can. But just to answer, think of it like, are you guys familiar with like software and like phones and like video games and stuff like that a little bit? So like there's such a thing called overclocking the GPU or overclocking the CPU, where essentially you get the CPU to run at faster electrical communication gradients. If you're into that sort of thing and you're building your own computer, the thing you eventually kind of holds you back is the temperature, right? So you then end up buying these super cooling coils and water cooled GPUs and all of this type of stuff, because electronics, photonics, and magnetic fields all get manipulated by temperature in a very positive way. In other words, you can do more work and enhance communication at lower temperatures. You cool the body off in a cold plunge, right? So now you've done all of this intricate biophysics of lowering the temperature at all of your circuitry, right? Then you give it maximum input, aka UV light and the full magnetic field spectrum while you're grounded, right? So now you can not overheat, produce more work, and produce more communication and make the body more cohesive, because now you're gathering all the external inputs that govern internal inputs, and the biophotons from the cold plunge are now from the mitochondrial level going out as well, right? So the sun, the inputs from the sun, the master, how would you call it? The closest macroscopic mitochondria or energy process that you're paying attention to, that your biology is paying attention to, you're maximizing its benefits and lowering the cost to do business with it. And the cold is enhancing all of your micro suns to exploit more and more energy and processes into the body at a lower cost of doing business. Right?
Great.
That's what you're doing. So in the tropics, cold feels pretty nice. So a 6-minute cold plunge isn't too hard. That you've done a body a big service by lowering its temperature, and then you go sit out in the sun and you continue to rise in terms of metabolic rate and all the processes that are being dictated by the photonics, with minimizing the load on the body. Reactive oxygen species, heat shock proteins, all of that stuff. And then once you dry off, there isn't really any more benefit. Now you're going back to that red line, because eventually you hit a red line. There is such a thing as, depending on your epigenetics, right? Unless you're, for example, Australian, and I mean a real Australian, an Aboriginal Australian, right? They are shielded from that amount of heat because the amount of melanin absorbs all the radiation without distributing the heat into the body. You see what I mean? There is such a thing as you can be too hot, right? I'm not saying you can get too much sunlight. I'm saying you cannot assimilate that amount of energy because your circuitry is not adapted to capture all of the excess, right? That you can do yourself a service by lowering the temperature manually, especially if you're lighter skinned and all of that. So it's a really good hack for people of lighter skin, but it works for all skin types. This is a hack for everybody, and it works on these fundamentals. And so then you just repeat that process. You can do it for a lot longer than 30 minutes, but 30 minutes is enough that when you get done with that process, for the next several hours, 2 or 3 hours, you are going to have abundance of dopamine creation, abundance of neurotransmitter. You see what I'm saying? Like, it's a hack for certain outcomes, right? Yeah.
Great. Another one very related to it. It's
Yeah, sure.
cold water in the face, and an ice cube in the mouth for sleeping. Why is that so good?
Yeah. So what your cold, like I said, raises magnetic fields, right? I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the work of Robert Robecker, but he basically demonstrated the magnetic fields can put salamanders to sleep. It's basically general anesthesia if the magnetic field is high enough. I'm not aware that it can be done with mammals, but it theoretically can, right? Now, that's not really what we're talking about. The point is, it's been demonstrated that a magnetic field basically switches the polarity in neurons that cause sleep, right? At the mammal level, we know that for sure this magnetic field change makes the receptors of melatonin more susceptible to the melatonin. If you combine darkness, which is going to have maximal release of melatonin, with cooling the brain, or at least the blood flow to the brain, then you're going to enhance the sensitivity to the melatonin. So it's going to enhance that initial spike to really cause a really downward fall in sleep. Why that's important is because melatonin is a baton right? Melatonin is the baton that gets handed off to the next system that takes over in the regeneration pathways that should be happening at night. They all don't happen at the same time, right? So for example, the next pathway is like the metabolism pathway. Depending on how much melatonin is sensed, the amount of thyroid, T4 to be specific, will then be calculated, for lack of a better way, right? So you're influencing this cascade of neurotransmitter, hormone, all the way until you get to leptin that should be happening sometime around 1 or 2 a.m., right? So the release of leptin, or so I should say, the integration of leptin into the brain happens around midnight to 2 a.m. That cascade has to be followed, or is there has to be a prerequisite cascade of melatonin, thyroid, growth hormone, then the leptin gets let in that way, that cascade of events. So you're that hack of getting the face cold or getting the blood flow, like the giving yourself a brain freeze, augments that cascade.
Even the ice cube in the mouth. It was
Yeah, because what you're doing is you're going to cool off. When the ice cube in the mouth, you want to try to get it to the back of the mouth and get the blood at the back of the mouth that's going to the brain to cool off, right? That's why you want it in the mouth. And then in the face, right, all these nerves and all the tissues and all the blood vessels go here and then come back to the carotid right here. So they're going to flow past the surfaces that are cooling the brain directly, right? So now, could you just get in a cold plunge? Sure, you can do that, right? But right before bed, who wants to do that but you still want to augment sleep and stuff like that. So you can just, get a bowl full of ice with some water in it, hold your breath. And that's the other thing. The reason why you're dunking your face is not just this cooling effect. You're also inducing the mammalian dive reflux. So that's immediately going to turn on the parasympathetic pathways, reduce heart rate, reduce oxygenation. So now you're lowering reactive oxygen species, etc. You're basically reinforcing the signal that it's nighttime and it's time to shift to this parasympathetic regeneration phase, and not just at the nervous system level, but at the neurotransmitter and hormonal level as well.
Lars, I have still 2 left. Do you
okay.
One?
No, go.
Since you were already talking about lymphoma, or maybe lymphoma in the beginning in your own story, do you have it's also, I know it's tough, but I think you're the best person to maybe still even being able to do it. Do you have some recommendations when somebody is getting diagnosed with lymphoma?
Yeah, I would say the very, very first thing is, I would echo what Jack has said just about that. When you get to the point where it's like at that level, heavily, heavily consider your environment before anything else. Like you should turn over every stone when it comes to your environment when you're dealing with cancer. At this point, I don't even hesitate with that, because it might not even be an electromagnetic. It could literally be the water you're drinking. You know what I'm saying? Like that's what I mean. I would say when you get diagnosed with a cancer, it doesn't even have to be lymphoma, or are possibly being diagnosed with that, right? That's the outcome that things are moving towards. The very first thing that I would say is you need to audit your environment. Do not let anybody else do it for you. Verify it yourself if you have to, right? That means send your own water that you drink regularly off to get tested. That means hire somebody if you need to test for electromagnetic fields or heavy metals in your soils or in the foods that you're consuming. You see what I mean? Like everything about cancer that we know of is basically a disruption of a metabolic process. And from what we know of, metabolic processes are dictated by the environment, not the other way around, right? So you don't even have to believe the whole thing of like mitochondria and electromagnetic fields and all of that. You don't have to believe anything about what we said to understand that cancer is a reaction to your environment telling you that you cannot be cohesive in the situation that you're at, right? And so then you got to understand, what are the inputs into my environment, right? And audit that as cleanly as possible and make it as cleanly as possible. Then once you've done that, if you want to add anything else, deuterium depleted water on top of your chemo treatment, and ivermectin or fenbenzine, all of that stuff, if you get that base stuff right, I think that the other stuff works better. I think you still have to vet those other things very, very carefully, because those are going to be inputs into your body. But I'm not opposed to, oh, you got to do it this way and you can't do it a different way. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I would do, right? I would just say that the thing that jumps right to the very top rung, if you don't get it right, none of the other stuff really matters, in my opinion. That is the environment. Right?
Yeah.
At this point, I know that with 100% certainty. If I've moved and I've built a house that's very specific to do all these types of things of shielding and all of that type of stuff because of this understanding. Even now, if I were to get some kind of a diagnosis that says that my immune system is not reacting correct, like say I don't get cancer, but I get an autoimmune problem. Even right now, living where I live, the very first thing is I would audit where I live. Why? Like something's been missed or something's changed. Right? That's what I'm trying to highlight. Just because it might be pristine at one point in time doesn't mean it's pristine at a different point in time. Right? Maybe I have a neighbor that lives down the road that now has Starlink, or 5 or 6 neighbors that have You see what I mean? Anything is possible. So even for me right now, knowing that I've built like a sanctuary, for lack of a better way to say it, for the time being, that doesn't mean that it can't change. Right? So that's the very first thing that I would say with anything like this. Audit your environment heavily. Only if you can prove that it's clean, then I would say, okay, now let's start talking about other interventions, what to do, that type of thing, a deuterium depletion diet, deuterium depleted water, all the other stuff, right? But that's where I would start in terms of make sure that there isn't something that's going to sabotage you.
Yeah, great answer. Thanks. And one last, we had this situation, we talked about it before, like what would you do if you have an eczema, and when you're in the sun, your skin is getting itchy. Actually, you usually would say like, okay, you have a skin issue, go into the sun, that will help you. But if your skin is getting itchy and you can't tolerate the sun, and on top of that you have a fish allergy.
Yeah. So I would say a couple things. Number one, this is a difficult situation because you're going to ask somebody to do things that they are not comfortable with doing. Right? So number one, I would say this: you need to get an omega-3, omega-6 ratio test, right? So that you can confirm for yourself that that is the problem. Now, I don't know this, right? So I'm just speaking from what I would say, right? If that comes back clean, right? Hey, your omega-3s are higher than 8%, and your linoleic acid, right? That's the omega-6 that I pay attention to. Your linoleic acid is lower than 15%, right? So it's somewhere between 10 and 15% or lower. And your omega-3s are 8% or higher. If those are perfect numbers, right? If those come back like that or close to that, and you're having this issue, then I would say that your ability to make melanin is compromised, and you're making too much nitric oxide per unit of time that you're out there, which is causing the itchiness and the redness. And the eczema tells me that this has been going on for a long time. So that's what I'm saying. Like, your skin could just be too fragile, right? Your membranes, the skin itself can't make melanin at the right appropriate rate. Something's dysregulated, which kind of reinforces the eczema. And so then I would say you want to start doing kind of like what I just said, right? You want to start getting a little bit less intense light, maybe more outside time, more red light, more of that, and then use just like synthetic targeted psoriasis type lighting for your eczema. So you would only use very specific narrow band UVB light on the places where you have eczema, not actual aggressive sunlight, and you would get as much of the morning time and evening time of sunlight on all your body as possible. And that's where I would go. And then potentially adding in deuterium depleted water, or looking at the deuterium level in your body, whichever you choose to do, because that's what's going to influence the enzyme and the metabolic turnover of the skin. In about 30 to 40 days, you should get better, because we know that the skin turnover rate is around 30 to 40 days, right? So if you're drinking some deuterium depleted water, you're getting infinite amounts of natural red light at the bookends of the day and you're getting targeted UV therapy in the middle of the day, I would say by 30 days you should be able to handle sun without that same reaction. That's if your omega-3s are fine. If they are not, now you have a different dilemma, right? Because you told me this person is allergic to fish and all of that, right? So then it becomes, okay, what can we do about this? Well, we need your cells to turn. So then I would still get an omega, I would base this on this ratio test, right? Because if your linoleic acid is high and your omega-3s are low, you can do a lot that doesn't have to involve the fish. By aggressively reducing the linoleic acid, because it competes, the enzyme that keeps that metabolizes linoleic acid, it's the thing that allows you to assimilate omega-3s and recycle them. So without increasing any fish or omega-3 intake, if you aggressively reduce linoleic acid, your omega-3s go up.
What would it be? Like what foods is that?
Canola oil, soybean oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil, soybean oil, all of those, right?
Besides
Coconut oil would be fine, but that's what I'm saying. Though if you're eating anything that's packaged, it has those in it. If you're eating eggs that are industry raised, it's being fed soybean, right? That's what I'm saying. Like there is. That's why you have to audit yourself to know, oh, my linoleic acid level is high. What am I eating, right? Even if I'm not eating a lot of prepackaged foods, if my diet consists of a whole bunch of industrial raised chicken eggs, well, guess what? Those chicken eggs have a whole lot of omega seeds and omega sixes in them because they're being fed an omega 6 diet and they're a single stomach animal. Cows are a little bit different, right? Ruminants, you can feed them whatever you want and they're going to digest that differently. They don't fill their tissues with a lot of omega 6s. They don't make nearly as many omega 3s, but they don't fill their tissues with omega 6s like single stomach animals, like industrially raised bacon from pigs or industrially raised chickens, etc. The things that most people are told that are healthy, right? Eat lean cuts of pork, eat lean chicken, eat egg. You see what I'm saying? You can still mess up this omega 6, omega 3 thing if you're doing that type of stuff. So that the easiest way for me to kind of figure out if that's happening is to just have them test their omega 6 and omega 3 ratio, because we get a clear picture of, hey, your diet can actually change quite a bit the outcome of this skin stuff that's happening.
Interesting. Yeah, and I bet EMF also play a big role. I mean, all the things we
it will, but that's what I'm saying. Omega 3s are sacrificial in an EMF environment that still protect you, whereas omega 6s will actually cause disruption, right? They'll cause more oxidation, which is probably the itchiness. Again, if it's an omega, if it's a fatty acid problem, the itchiness is probably the omega 6s being basically oxidized. If it is not a lipid problem, then it's probably a nitric oxide problem, because you're not able to make melanin correctly, which is either hypoxia or deuteration. So that's where the deuterium depleted water comes in and that sort of stuff. You see what I'm saying? It depends on where she lands there, or he or whoever, right? But it depends on that. And the quickest way to get to the what is it is this omega 3, omega 6 ratio. In this particular case, that's where I would start, right? There are infinite possibilities of what this could be, by the way. I'm just saying, from my experience, that's where I would start if this person contacted me.
Wow. Yeah, thank you so much. Helps a lot. Lars, do you have more?
I think we could talk for hours.
Yeah.
But
David is on fire.
Ben, do you have anything more? Otherwise,
I mean, yeah, let's maybe one last thing. Like, do you have a really good success story that comes to your mind just intuitively right now? Like what you experienced? You have so many clients, and I'm always curious about things like that.
Success. Oh, well, it depends on what you define as success, right? Like I have clients, that are very like. So here's a success story. Somebody that came to me. He was a power lifter, right, and a big person, right, 300 pounds. Came to me for powerlifting, and so I helped him get to some competitions, and do really, really well. He was quite strong. Ended up totaling like 1,700 pounds. In terms of kilos, that's probably like, I want to say 700 kilos, something like that. Right. So pretty decent. He's a little bit older than me. And when he got done with that, he felt like he could do whatever he set his mind to, right, in terms of working with me. And then he goes, "Do you think that I could lose 100 pounds and compete in, just a bodybuilding show, like, and show off my body that way?" I'm like, "Yeah, we can totally do that. It's going to be a lot of work. It's probably going to take a couple of years, and you're probably going to need a lot of motivation and a lot of mental power and a lot of mental fortitude to get this done." And he goes, "Okay, so how do we start?" You know how we started? Exactly with how this podcast started, right? As far as like integration, making sure that the willpower you're deriving is coming from an external source, which is nature. Your willpower is infinite at that point, right? So that was, for lack of a better way to say, the brainwashing that needed to happen for him to fulfill his accomplishment, right? There was no GLP-1s involved in this or anything like that. There was some PEDs because he still wanted to maintain his muscle tissue that he accrued while powerlifting. But there was minimal, right? Like basically TRT, if you want to call it anything, right? Just enough to maintain your muscle tissue, nothing in excess, but a lot of, hey, get up, you're going out in the morning, you're going to get grounded, you're going to stretch, you're going to go for a run, you're going to do this, every morning for the first hour of every day. You're going to do all the stuff that we've been talking about, right? He did it to the T. 1 year, he lost 100 pounds, competed on a bodybuilding stage. And then, this is what he says, "Hey, all of this cardio and all of this stuff that I've been doing, I've really been liking it, and I want to compete in high rocks." So a year goes by, he competes in high rocks, does really well. He goes from being, and this is not derogatory, like a fat power lifter, 40-year-old person that, and none of that is wrong, right? Like that, none of that is that's what he hired me for to begin with. But the habits that I had him do to handle inflammation and to recover from the training were all of this circadian stuff, which inevitably affects neurotransmitters and dopamine and willpower and all the things that we started this whole podcast with, right? And that gave him more to shoot for. Basically, he never stopped. And to this day, he's never stopped. And now he has his own business and he's a coach, and people come to his garage to train with him every single day because he trains outside. And, he just has become a beacon of influence in his community for the people that interact with his family, etc., and for himself, in basically showing everybody, hey, if you just want to do it and you know what you're doing, you can do whatever you want, right? That is definitely a very unique case that I've been a part of, and that's been 4 years, since I was first contacted from him to where he is now.
Wow. Yeah. Great story. Yeah, I think it makes everything very round now. The circle is closed, and I mean, it's just another example of how deep and how foundational the connection of nature actually can be, and then it can go in every direction. You just make kind of better decisions. You can hear it also, I think, in David's stories and David's explanations, and also in his observation of his own body. When you just have the foundation right, you understand more what's actually going on around you, and make decisions around that and based on that. And it's sometimes when you are low dopamine, I'm also talking from my own experience, it's even hard to realize what it is. But when you get higher in dopamine, you realize, oh, yeah, now decision making somehow becomes differently, and it has an effect on all aspects of life, like how you sense your body, but also how you interact with other human beings or animals, or with everything around you. And it's beautiful to hear that you experienced the same, and the story was was cool. Yeah, like anything you said today, it's a lot. Lars and me, we always do a recap episode. That's going to be tough, this one. It's almost like a cruise. Like need to listen 3 times to it. Yeah. That is
Well,
good.
that's good.
It's good to learn for me.
Awesome,
Yeah.
awesome. Well, I'm glad. Yes, and we're happy to do a follow up if you guys would like and get into other things. But yeah, yeah, it was a
Sure.
pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It was
thank you
fun.
very much, David. It was really a
Ah,
pleasure to talk to you. And yeah, thank you for sharing your story, for everything, for all those insights you have. And yeah, maybe we can talk another time about different things.
yeah. And please,
Awesome.
David, let the people know where they can, how they can work with you and where.
Yeah, yeah. So you can get me at davidherrera.net or thesolarathlete.com or .net as far as like a website that you can go and book consultations. But I'm also on Instagram, the same thing, the Solar Athlete or David Herrera. Both of those are me. One's just my solar athlete stuff, and one's more personal. And I have a podcast that I do every Tuesday called Becoming Superhuman with one of my athletic friends. His name is Yuris from Latvia, and so we do have a Becoming Superhuman YouTube channel / podcast. And so any in any of those places, you'll find either a link to a consultation service or a website where you can consult with me. And obviously, if you find me on any of Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube, you can always um, direct message me there if you need help,
Mm.
booking a consultation.
I can highly recommend you guys that. So I never had a consultation, but I know many people who did, and I just talking to David feels like a consultation often. So you see that he is very
Well, that's good. That's good.
feels you can hear that he has always an answer that is really specifically for you. So yeah, try it out.
Okay.
All right, guys,
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
have a good week.
Bye.